night. And her spiritual director, John of the Cross, he writes a lot more about the dark night than she does. But St. Teresa says very clearly, if you want to have union with God, you must first pass through the dark night of your senses and of your soul, right? And that's a period of great difficulty, right? Where it feels like God is very far away, but in fact, he's very close. He's so close that he blinds you and you can't see. So we see Teresa, you remember, how many of you remember Mother Teresa, right? Do you remember hearing about her? I know some of you are too young, you don't know her, right? She died before you were born, right? But Mother Teresa was a very famous woman who served the poor, and she chose Teresa because of Therese of Lisieux, who chose her name because of Teresa of Avila, right? So you see the chain, bing, 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 right? And the thing was, Mother Teresa experienced this dark night of the soul for 40 years, where she felt nothing of God's presence, right? But in fact, it was because she was so close to God. Everyone else could see God in her, right? But she couldn't see it in herself. So it was a great suffering for her. She felt like God was very far away, but in fact, he was very close to her. But this is the last stage before union with God, right? And so Teresa, she's very clear on this. We must pass through purification. So she did that in her early years. And then God then started to fill her with graces and then give her the grace to be able to talk about it afterwards. So if you want to learn about that, I encourage you to read her. She's really good. Okay. Now, I want to just leave you with something as an image for your prayer, just so you know there's always more and how you can pray better. So she talks about 4 waters of prayer, okay? And these are the different stages of prayer. The initial stage is you have a well where you're using a bucket to get water out of it, okay? This first stage is called vocal prayer. So how many of you know you pray your rosary? You know your prayers, okay? The rosary is vocal prayer, all right? The Our Father, the Hail Mary, the Glory Be, all these prayers you can say. There's other prayers, Divine Mercy. These are vocal prayers. Anybody can pray these, right? But it's the lowest grade of prayer, right? It's the beginning. It's oftentimes hard. Sometimes it's easy, but sometimes you put the bucket down and you don't put it down far enough, you don't get any water when you pull it up, right? So sometimes that's what your prayer is like. It might be very frustrating at times, but you can do it. You always can lower the bucket and try and draw up water. Then there's a second grade of prayer, which is a water wheel. How many of you know what a water wheel is, right? Okay, so it's like alongside the river, and you're kind of like pulling it up, and the water then goes into there. It's a little bit less work, right? But you still gotta turn the water wheel a little bit. You still work it a little bit. That's called meditative prayer. So the rosary is also a meditative prayer. It's not just vocal prayers, but you can also meditate on the mysteries of the life of Jesus, right? So meditation is when you focus on something, like we focus on the cross, or we focus on the mysteries of the rosary, and we think about them, right? Lots of people can meditate. Some people can't meditate very well. They're very distracted. Who here gets distracted easy? I do too, okay? So sometimes meditation's easy, sometimes it's difficult, right? But those are 2 kinds of prayer you can do by yourself, right? All the time. The next 2 grades are supernatural prayers that you can't force, but they're gifts from God. The next phase is irrigation. You take the river and you put a channel and it waters the garden, right? That's pretty cool, right? So that's the phase of prayer that's an infused contemplation. You're praying and all of a sudden you get a vision. Or all of a sudden you feel like God is really close to you. You can't make that happen. That's something God does in you, right? In those situations, sometimes you will feel heat. Sometimes you'll feel love from God. Sometimes you'll hear things, you'll see things. Some people smell roses. How many of you smelled roses before? Like we're just like, there's no flowers, and all of a sudden you smell roses, right? Or like you're just aware that there's something supernatural going on. That's the 3rd grade of prayer. There's lots of other kinds she describes. And there's amazing things that happen in that grade of prayer. But there's more. There's a 4th water, which is the rain, right? Where God soaks the earth. We don't know when it's going to come, but when it happens, you're just completely passive. Like we have to do the channel a little bit, right, to get the water to flow in the right direction for the 3rd one. You can dispose yourself to that kind of prayer, but you can't make it happen, right? And the rain is completely out of our control. It's entirely God's providence, right? But when that happens, then it's really just you are soaked with God's presence. And have you ever just stood out in the rain and just like gotten soaked? You ever done that before? One time I was in Mexico and I was walking home and then it just poured, just downpour, just like monsoon. I was gonna run. I'm like, it's not gonna do any good. I'm getting soaked, and you just accept it, and it's just incredible, right? You're just filled with that kind of water, right? So saying we want the rain because then it's less work, right? And God just does His work supernaturally in us. But first we have to purify ourselves quite a bit before those last 2 grades of prayer happen. There's lots of beautiful things she describes. I hope that you read a bit about her. Her life was pretty incredible. And as Jesus says, when we remain in him, we can ask for whatever we want, and he'll do it. So let's remain in him, friends. Remember, you can always do the little work here in the beginning and then dispose yourself to the greater work. But it requires sacrifice. It requires that you're willing to give up stuff. Because if we want to live in the world with these pleasures, we'll never know the great things of God. So let's ask for her intercession that today we would put aside the pleasures of this world and receive the heavenly delights. St. Teresa of Avila, pray for us.